Precious was 17 years old, and life had taught her that dreams were a luxury she could not afford. She woke up every morning before the sun rose, her body still aching from the previous day's work. Her small room in the crowded slums of Lagos was no bigger than a closet, with a thin mattress on the floor and a single window that looked out onto the busy street below. She shared this space with her grandmother, who spent most of her days sitting on a worn mat, coughing and waiting for death to take her away. The work that Precious did was hard and never-ending. She cleaned houses for rich people who lived in the nice parts of Lagos, in places called Ikoyi and Victoria Island. These were neighborhoods where the buildings were so tall they seemed to touch the sky, and the cars parked outside cost more money than Precious would ever see in her entire life. She would spend her days scrubbing floors until her knees turned red, washing clothes until her fingers became wrinkled and sore, and cooking meals that she was not allowed to eat. The families she worked for barely noticed her. She was like furniture to them, something that was there to serve a purpose and then disappear. But Precious never complained. Her grandmother needed medicine, and the small amount of money Precious earned was the only thing keeping her alive. So every morning she put on her faded dress and walked to whatever house needed her that day. She had worked for many families over the past 3 years, and they all seemed to blur together in her memory. Rich people, she had learned, were all the same. They wanted their homes cleaned, their clothes pressed, and their presents forgotten. On a Tuesday morning in March, something different happened. Precious was assigned to work at a penthouse in Ikoyi, a place that belonged to a man named Chisholm. She had heard people whisper about him. They said he was a billionaire, a man who had made his fortune in technology. They said he was cold and distant, that he barely spoke to anyone. Some people said he was evil, that he had crushed many people on his way to becoming rich. Precious did not know if any of this was true. She only knew that she needed the job, and that was enough. When she arrived at the penthouse, it was so beautiful that it took her breath away. The floors were made of marble that shone like mirrors. The walls were painted in soft colors, and there were paintings hanging everywhere that looked like they belonged in a museum. The furniture was modern and sleek, nothing like the broken chairs and old sofas in the homes of ordinary people. Precious felt small and out of place, like she did not belong in such a grand space. Her supervisor, a stern woman named Folklore, showed her around the apartment and gave her tasks to complete. She was to dust the furniture, sweep the floors, organize the kitchen, and do the laundry. Folklore warned her not to touch anything unnecessary and to stay away from Chisholm's private study on the 3rd floor. But Precious, being young and curious, could not help but wonder what was hidden behind that closed door. By afternoon, Precious had finished most of her work. The penthouse was gleaming, and even Folklore seemed satisfied. But as she was putting away the cleaning supplies, she realized she had forgotten to dust the study. It was against her instructions, but she told herself that she would quickly go in and out. She would dust the surfaces and leave. It would take only a few minutes. The study was different from the rest of the apartment. While everywhere else was bright and modern, this room felt old and personal. There were wooden shelves filled with books, leather chairs, and paintings on the walls. In the corner was a large desk made of dark wood. And on one of the shelves, Precious saw it. A photograph in a silver frame. At first, she did not understand what she was looking at. She moved closer, her heart beginning to beat faster. The photograph showed 2 people standing together. A young woman with a beautiful smile, her arm linked through a man's. The woman had a face that Precious knew as well as she knew her own reflection. It was her mother. It was Mira. Precious's hands began to shake. Her mother had died when she was only 5 years old. She had memories of her, but they were fading, becoming less clear with each passing year. She remembered a soft voice singing to her, warm hands braiding her hair, and the smell of her mother's skin. But she had never known much about her mother's life before Precious was born. Her grandmother had always been vague about such things, changing the subject whenever Precious asked questions about her father or about her mother's past. But here, in this photograph, was her mother, alive and young and happy, standing beside a man that Precious had never seen before. She picked up the frame with trembling fingers. The date on the back read 20 years ago. That would have been before Precious was born, when her mother was still young and beautiful, before the sickness that killed her. Who was this man? How did her mother know him? Why was this photograph in the home of a billionaire? And why had no one ever told her about this? Precious was so lost in her thoughts that she did not hear the footsteps behind her. Suddenly, a sharp voice cut through the silence. Precious, what are you doing in this room? It was Folklore, her supervisor, and she was angry. Her face had turned red, and she was looking at Precious as if she had committed a terrible crime. I was just dusting, Precious said quickly, trying to put the photograph back on the shelf. but Folake rushed over and took the frame from her hands. "You should not be here," Folake said coldly. "This room is off limits. Come. We are leaving now." She took Precious by the arm and pulled her toward the door. As they walked down the hallway, Precious turned around one last time and looked back at the study. Through the open door, she could see the shelf where the photograph sat, and she could see the face of her mother smiling at her from across the room and across the years. That night, Precious could not sleep. She lay on her mattress in the darkness, staring up at the ceiling, her mind spinning with questions. Who was that man in the photograph? How had her mother known him? What had happened between them? Why was this photograph in the home of Chisholm, a billionaire? And most importantly, why had her grandmother never told her about this? She thought about asking her grandmother, but she was afraid. Her grandmother was old and tired, and Precious did not want to upset her. Besides, if her grandmother had wanted her to know about the photograph, would she not have told her already? But Precious's curiosity burned inside her like a fire that could not be put out. She knew that she had to find answers no matter what the cost. 3 days passed like 3 years for Precious. She could not stop thinking about the photograph. During the day she worked for other families, cleaning their homes and cooking their meals, but her mind was always back in that study, staring at her mother's smiling face. At night, she lay awake on her thin mattress, listening to her grandmother's soft snoring, and wondered about the man in the picture. Who was he? Did he know about Precious? Did he know that her mother had died? Her grandmother noticed that something was wrong. "You are not eating properly," the old woman said one morning, touching Precious's forehead to check if she had a fever. "And you have dark circles under your eyes. Are you sick, my child?" Precious lied and said she was fine, just tired from work. She could not tell her grandmother the truth. Not yet. Not until she understood what the photograph meant. On Friday morning, Precious made a decision that frightened her. She knew she should not go back to Chisholm's penthouse. She knew that Folake had warned her to stay away from the study. She knew that if she was caught again she might lose her job. But the need to know the truth was stronger than her fear. She had to go back. She had to find that photograph again. When Precious arrived at the penthouse that morning, she felt her heart pounding in her chest like a drum. She did her work quietly and carefully, always listening for sounds that might tell her where Chisholm was in the apartment. As the hours passed and the sun climbed higher in the sky, she heard a door open on the 3rd floor. Her stomach tightened. Chisholm was home. Precious knew this was her chance. She climbed the stairs slowly, her legs feeling heavy and weak. When she reached the study, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The photograph was still there on the shelf, exactly where it had been 3 days ago. She walked toward it, her eyes fixed on her mother's face, and she did not hear the footsteps behind her until a voice spoke. "You." The word was sharp and sudden, and it made Precious jump. She spun around to see a tall man standing in the doorway. He was Chisholm. His face was dark and angry, but as he looked at Precious, his expression changed. His eyes narrowed and he stepped closer to her. For a long moment he said nothing. He just stared at her face as if he was trying to see something hidden beneath her skin. "What is your name?" he asked quietly. Precious's voice came out as a whisper. "Precious." The color drained from Chisholm's face. He looked as if someone had struck him. He reached out and gripped the back of a chair to steady himself. "Precious," he repeated as if the word was burning his tongue. "Your mother. Tell me about your mother. Now." Something in his voice made Precious want to run, but she was frozen in place. She could see that this man was experiencing real pain, real shock. So she began to talk. The words came slowly at first, then faster and faster, pouring out of her like water from a broken dam. She told him about Mira, about the mother she barely remembered. She told him about the fever that had come when Precious was only 5 years old, how her mother had grown weaker and weaker until one morning she did not wake up. She told him about her grandmother raising her in a tiny room in the slums, about the poverty and hunger, about working as a domestic helper since she was 14 years old. She told him about the questions that had haunted her all her life. Who was her father? Why did he never come for her? Why had her mother never spoken of him? As Precious spoke, tears ran down her face. She did not try to wipe them away. The words had opened something inside her that she had kept closed for a long time. When she finished speaking, she looked at Chisholm and saw that tears were also running down his face. "Sit down," he said, and his voice was gentle now, nothing like the harsh sound it had been before. Precious sat down in one of the leather chairs, and Chisholm sat down across from her. For a long moment he did not speak. He was looking at her face, studying every feature as if trying to memorize it. "My name is Chisholm," he finally said. And I loved your mother very much. A long time ago, 20 years ago, your mother and I were together. We loved each other. We made plans for the future. We were going to get married and build a life together." His voice broke as he spoke, and he had to pause to collect himself. "But then I left Lagos," he continued. "My family sent me away to study abroad. They wanted me to build my fortune and become successful. I promised your mother that I would send for her, that I would come back and marry her. But my family found out about our relationship. They were not happy. They said that your mother was not good enough for me, that she came from a poor family. They threatened me. They said if I continued to see her, they would disown me and cut me off from everything. They said they would destroy your mother's family business and make sure your family became even poorer than you already were." Precious listened in silence, her eyes wide. "I was young and afraid," Chisholm said, his voice filled with shame. "I was foolish and weak. Instead of fighting for your mother, instead of standing up to my family, I did what they told me to do. I married someone else, a woman from a rich family that my parents had chosen for me. And I tried to forget about your mother. I tried to build my business and become the man my family wanted me to be." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "But I never stopped thinking about her. Not for a single day in all these years. I kept that photograph because it was the only thing I had left of her. Sometimes I would look at it and remember the way she laughed, the way she smiled at me, the way she made me feel like I was the most important person in the world." He turned back to face Precious. "I tried many times to find her. I sent people to look for her. But my family made sure that I could not reach her. They had connections, they had power, and they used it to keep us apart. And then one day I received a message that Mira had died. It was too late. I had lost her forever." That evening, Chisholm asked Precious for her grandmother's address. He said he needed to speak with her. Precious was nervous about what would happen, but she gave him the information. That night, her grandmother came home with a look on her face that Precious had never seen before. The old woman sat down on the mat and took Precious's hands in hers. "I have been keeping a secret for a very long time," her grandmother said. "A secret that was not mine to keep. Your mother was pregnant when Chisholm left Lagos. She never got to tell him. She waited and waited for him to come back, but he never did. And then she became sick and she died, and I raised you alone. I was angry at him for leaving her, and so I kept the truth hidden. But today he came to find us. Today I finally told him the truth. You are his daughter, Precious. You are Chisholm's child." Within a week, Precious's life had changed completely. Chisholm arranged for her to move into his mansion in Ikoyi. The room they gave her was larger than the entire space she had shared with her grandmother in the slums. It had a real bed with clean white sheets, a desk for studying, a closet filled with new clothes, and windows that looked out onto a beautiful garden. Precious stood in the middle of the room on her first night and could not believe that this place was now hers. Chisholm enrolled her in one of the best private schools in Lagos, a place called Crown Academy where the children of the richest families in Nigeria came to study. He bought her new uniforms, new shoes, new books, and everything else she needed. The other students at the school wore expensive jewelry and carried fancy bags. They talked about vacations abroad and parties at expensive clubs. For the first time in her life, Precious did not have to worry about money. She did not have to work after school. She did not have to go home to a room so small that she could touch both walls if she stretched out her arms. But something inside Precious was broken, and no amount of money could fix it. Every night, she lay in her comfortable bed and thought about all the years she had suffered. She thought about the nights when her stomach was empty and she had nothing to eat. She thought about the cold winters when she had only a thin blanket to keep warm. She thought about wearing the same dress for weeks because she had no other clothes. She thought about her mother, dying poor and alone, while Chisholm was building his fortune and becoming rich. Why, she asked herself, did her mother have to suffer? Why did Precious have to grow up in poverty and pain? The answer was simple. Because Chisholm was a coward. Because he was weak. Because when his family told him to abandon her mother, he did exactly what they said. He did not fight for her. He did not stand up for what was right. He just gave up and married someone else. Precious tried to be grateful. She tried to smile and say thank you when Chisholm bought her things or asked her about school. But inside, her anger was growing like a weed, spreading through her heart and poisoning everything. She watched him at dinner, sitting at the head of the table in his expensive suit, and she felt nothing but resentment. As weeks passed and Precious settled into her new life, she began to understand more about how Chisholm had built his fortune. She overheard conversations between him and his business partners. She read articles about him in newspapers and on the internet. What she learned disturbed her deeply. Chisholm's company had grown wealthy by buying up small businesses belonging to poor people and then closing them down. He had taken land from farmers who could not afford to pay high prices, and then he had built shopping centers and apartment buildings on that land, making millions of naira. He had bought factories and then fired most of the workers to reduce his costs, making the remaining workers work longer hours for less money. He had cut corners on safety and environmental protection to save money, and people in the communities where his factories operated had become sick from pollution. Precious read stories about families that Chisholm had hurt. She read about a woman who had lost her small shop when Chisholm's company bought the building and raised the rent so high that she could not afford to stay. She read about workers who had been injured in one of his factories because he had refused to spend money on proper safety equipment. She read about a village where children were getting sick because of pollution from one of his companies. When she asked Chisholm about these things, he would smile and explain that this was how business worked. He said that if he did not make these decisions, someone else would do it instead. He said that he had created many jobs and helped the economy grow. He said that poor people could not expect to succeed if they were not willing to work hard and be smart about business. But Precious could not accept these explanations. She thought about her mother working hard all her life, doing everything right and still dying poor. She thought about all the people that Chisholm had hurt on his way to becoming rich. She thought about the children in that village who were sick because of his pollution. She thought about the workers in his factories who were injured because he would not spend money to keep them safe. One day Precious came home from school and found Chisholm in the garden. He was sitting by the fountain looking peaceful and happy. She walked over to him and sat down beside him. "Father," she said, and the word felt strange in her mouth because she had never called him that before. "I want to ask you something." "Of course, my daughter," Chisholm said, smiling. "Ask me anything." "How do you feel about all the people that your business has hurt?" Precious asked. "How do you feel about the families that lost their homes and their shops? How do you feel about the workers who were injured because you would not spend money to keep them safe? How do you feel about the children who are sick because of the pollution from your factories?" Chisholm's smile faded. He was quiet for a long moment. "I do not think about these things," he said finally. "If I thought about them all the time, I would not be able to do business." "That is exactly the problem," Precious said, and her voice was shaking with anger. "You do not think about them. You do not care about them. You only care about becoming richer and richer. You hurt my mother because you were weak and afraid. And you have hurt countless other people because you are selfish and greedy." "Precious, that is not fair," Chisholm said, but his voice was weak and uncertain. "It is not about what is fair," Precious said. "It is about what is right. You say you love me. You say you are sorry for what happened with my mother. But you are still doing the same thing that you did to her. You are still hurting people. You are still choosing money over people's lives and happiness. How can I forgive you when you are still the same man who abandoned my mother? How can I accept your money when it is built on the suffering of other people?" Chisholm had no answer. He looked at Precious with sad eyes, and she could see that her words had hurt him. But Precious did not feel happy about hurting him. She just felt empty and tired. She stood up and walked back into the house, leaving her father sitting alone by the fountain. That night, Precious lay in her comfortable bed and cried. She cried for her mother who had suffered and died while Chisholm became rich. She cried for all the people that he had hurt. And she cried because she did not know if she could ever truly forgive him, no matter how hard he tried to make things right. Precious sat in the examination hall on a hot afternoon in June, writing her final examination for secondary school. Around her, other students bent over their papers, their pens moving quickly across the pages. She had worked hard for 3 years at Crown Academy, studying late into the night, reading every book that her teachers recommended, asking questions in class when she did not understand something. She had done all of this not because Chisholm had told her to, but because she wanted to prove something to herself. She wanted to show that even though she had come from poverty and suffering, she had the intelligence and the strength to succeed. When the examination results came out 3 months later, Precious's name was at the top of the list. She had scored the highest marks in her entire class. The principal of Crown Academy called her into his office to congratulate her. "You have a brilliant mind," he told her. "You can do anything you want to do with your life. You can become a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, anything at all." Within weeks, job offers began to arrive. Companies wanted to hire Precious. They had seen her grades and her examination results, and they wanted her to work for them. One of the largest offers came from Chisholm's own company, TechVision. Chisholm had asked the head of human resources to make sure that Precious received the best offer possible. He wanted his daughter to work for him, to learn the business from him, to eventually take over the company when he retired. Precious held the letter from Tech Vision in her hands and read it carefully. The salary was more money than she had ever imagined. There were benefits, a car, housing allowance, and opportunities to travel abroad. Chisholm had even written her a personal letter saying how proud he was of her and how much he wanted her to join his company. But Precious could not accept the offer. Instead, she accepted a position with an organization called Community First. It was a small non-profit organization that worked to lift communities out of poverty. They provided training and education to poor people so they could learn new skills and find better jobs. They helped communities access clean water and basic health care. They taught people how to start small businesses and become financially independent. The salary was very small, barely enough to pay for a modest apartment and food. But this was the work that Precious wanted to do. When Chisholm found out about her decision, he was angry and hurt. He called her into his study, the same room where they had first truly met, where the photograph of her mother still sat on the shelf. "Why?" he demanded, his face red with emotion. "Why would you reject my offer? Do you know how hard I worked to make sure you had the best opportunities? Do you know how much I wanted you to be part of my company? I built Tech Vision so that you could have a future. I built it so that you would never have to suffer the way your mother suffered. And now you are throwing it all away." "I am not throwing anything away," Precious said calmly. "I am choosing to do something that matters. Working for Tech Vision would mean being part of a company that hurts people. It would mean helping you become even richer while other people suffer. I cannot do that. I will not do that." "You are being ungrateful," Chisholm said, his voice rising. "After everything I have given you, after taking you out of the slums and giving you a good education, you are punishing me by rejecting my offer. This is how you show your appreciation. This is how you show your love." "This has nothing to do with gratitude or love," Precious said. "This has to do with what is right. You taught me, even if you did not mean to, that I should think about other people. You taught me by showing me the opposite. By showing me what happens when someone only thinks about themselves and their own wealth. I am going to use my education and my talents to help people. That is my choice and I will not change my mind." Chisholm's face fell. He looked smaller, somehow less powerful. "If you leave this company, if you choose this path, then you are no longer my daughter," he said quietly. "I cannot support this decision. If you do this, we will have nothing left between us." Precious felt her heart break at these words. She had hoped that Chisholm would understand, that he would see that she was trying to do good in the world. But he was still the same man who had abandoned her mother because his family had pressured him. He still could not understand that there were things more important than money and power and success. "Then I suppose we have nothing left," Precious said, and her voice was steady even though tears were streaming down her face. She turned and walked out of the study, closing the door behind her. The next day, Precious moved out of Chisholm's mansion. She found a small apartment in a modest neighborhood, a place that reminded her of where she had lived with her grandmother. It was small and simple, with basic furniture and no luxuries. But it was hers, and she had paid for it with her own money from her new job. For the first few months, the work was difficult. Precious was working with communities that had no resources, no hope, no belief that their lives could change. She taught classes on financial literacy to women who had never been to school. She helped organize clean water projects in villages where children were dying from drinking contaminated water. She trained young people to start small businesses so they could earn money and support their families. The work was exhausting and the pay was barely enough to survive. But for the first time in her life, Precious felt like she was doing something that truly mattered. She was using her intelligence and her education to help people instead of to help herself become rich. She also reconnected with her grandmother, who had been living quietly in a small house that Chisholm had bought for her. Her grandmother was proud of Precious's decision. "Your mother would have been proud too," the old woman told her. "She always believed that the most important thing in life was to help other people and to live with integrity. You are living the life that she would have wanted for you." Precious threw herself into her work with passion and determination. She worked long hours and traveled to remote villages. She learned about the real problems that poor people faced, the struggles that she had experienced firsthand but had almost forgotten during her years at Crown Academy and living in Chisholm's mansion. She made new friends, people who also believed in helping others. She fell in love with a young man named Tund, who was a teacher at one of the schools where she worked. He came from a poor family like her own, and he understood her dreams and her values. Together they talked about the future and about the work they wanted to do. Precious did not contact Chisholm and he did not contact her. It was as if they were living in two different worlds. Chisholm was in his mansion in Ikoyi, building his business empire and becoming richer every day. Precious was in her small apartment in a poor neighborhood, working hard to help communities and making a real difference in people's lives. She had chosen her path, and even though it was difficult, she knew it was the right one. 10 years passed. Precious was now 28 years old, and her life had become something that she never could have imagined when she was a domestic helper cleaning rich people's homes. She had become an engineer, studying hard at university in the evenings and on weekends while working during the day. Her education from Crown Academy had given her the foundation she needed, and her determination had carried her through the difficult years of university. After completing her engineering degree, Precious had founded her own organization called Water and Light for Africa. With a team of dedicated people who shared her vision, she had brought clean water to 17 rural villages in Nigeria and neighboring countries. She had built systems that collected rainwater and filtered it so that families no longer had to walk for hours to find water that was safe to drink. She had also installed solar panels and electric systems in schools and healthcare centers, bringing electricity to places that had lived in darkness. Precious had been featured in newspapers and magazines. International organizations had recognized her work. Universities wanted her to give lectures about sustainable development and community engineering. But Precious remained humble and grounded. She still lived simply, driving an old car, wearing simple clothes, and putting most of her income back into her work. The poor communities she served had become her family, and their success was her greatest reward. She had married Tund, the teacher she had fallen in love with years ago. Together they had 2 children, and they lived in a house not far from the slums where Precious had grown up. Her grandmother, now very old, lived with them. Every day the old woman would sit on the porch and watch the neighborhood children play, and she would smile knowing that her granddaughter had become everything that her daughter Mira had dreamed of being. Chisholm, in the meantime, had spent those 10 years building his empire even larger. TechVision had become one of the largest companies in Nigeria. Chisholm was now one of the richest men in Africa. He had everything that money could buy: mansions in multiple countries, expensive cars, luxury yachts, and the respect of business people around the world. But something was missing. As Chisholm entered his 60s, his health began to fail. He had a heart attack one evening while sitting alone in his study. The doctors told him that he was lucky to have survived, but that he needed to change his lifestyle. He needed to reduce stress, exercise more, and think less about business and money. As he lay in the hospital bed, weak and frightened, Chisholm finally began to think about his life and what it had meant. He thought about the families that his business had hurt. He thought about the workers who had been injured in his factories. He thought about the communities that had suffered because of his factory's pollution. He thought about his daughter, Precious, who had rejected his wealth and his company to do meaningful work in the world. And he thought about Mira, the woman he had loved and abandoned, the woman who had died poor while he became rich. For the first time in his life, Chisholm felt ashamed. He felt empty. All the money in the world could not fill the void in his heart. All the business success could not make him feel proud of himself. He had spent 50 years pursuing wealth and power, and it had left him alone and miserable. When Chisholm recovered from his heart attack, he made a decision that surprised everyone who knew him. He began to research what his daughter had been doing. He read articles about Water and Light for Africa. He watched videos of Precious teaching engineering to young people in villages. He saw photographs of clean water systems that she had built, of children drinking safe water for the first time in their lives, of schools with electricity and lights. His pride and his stubbornness began to crack. He wanted to reach out to her, but he was afraid. What if she did not want to see him? What if she had completely moved on with her life and had no room for him? One day, Chisholm received a call from his assistant. Precious had been invited to give a lecture at a university in Lagos about sustainable development. Chisholm decided to attend the lecture. He sat in the back of the auditorium, hidden in the shadows, and listened to his daughter speak. Precious stood at the front of the room, confident and passionate, explaining to a room full of students how to build engineering solutions that could help poor communities. She talked about the importance of listening to local people and understanding their needs. She talked about using technology to solve real problems instead of just to make money. She talked about responsibility and integrity and the importance of using your talents to help others. As Chisholm listened to his daughter speak, tears ran down his face. He saw Mira in her. He saw his own best self in her, the person he could have been if he had been brave enough to stand up to his family and follow his heart. He saw everything that truly mattered in life reflected in his daughter's work and her words. After the lecture, Chisholm waited outside the auditorium. When Precious came out, she saw him and stopped walking. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Chisholm stepped forward. "Precious," he said, and his voice was humble and full of emotion. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. I was a fool. I was a coward. I wasted so many years chasing money and power instead of doing what was right. I hurt your mother. I hurt you. I hurt countless other people. And I am ashamed. I am deeply ashamed. Precious looked at her father, and she could see that he was telling the truth. She could see the pain and the regret in his face. She could see that he had finally understood. I have changed, Chisholm continued. I have realized that my wealth means nothing if it is not used for good. I want to help you. I want to help your mission. I want to use my resources and my connections to bring clean water and electricity to more villages. I want to help you change the world. Can you ever forgive me? Precious was quiet for a long moment. Then she embraced her father, and they both cried together, tears of pain and loss and hope and redemption. Together, Precious and Chisholm established the Mira Foundation, named after Precious's mother. They combined Chisholm's wealth and business connections with Precious's engineering expertise and her deep understanding of what poor communities needed. The foundation grew rapidly. Within 5 years, they had brought clean water to 100 villages and electricity to 500 schools. They trained young people in engineering and sustainable development. They partnered with communities to build solutions that were appropriate and lasting. Chisholm became a changed man. He stepped back from his business and focused his time and energy on the foundation. He traveled to remote villages with Precious to meet the people whose lives were being transformed by their work. He saw the joy in the eyes of mothers who no longer had to walk for hours to find water. He saw the hope in the faces of children who had electricity in their schools for the first time. On her grandmother's 85th birthday, Precious gathered her family around her. Her grandmother, her husband Tund, her 2 children, her father Chisholm, and all the people from the villages they had helped came together to celebrate. Precious's grandmother, sitting in the middle of this gathered family, smiled with a peace that came from knowing that her daughter's legacy would live on. Your mother would be so proud, the old woman whispered to Precious, taking her hand. She always believed that love and integrity were more important than anything else. You have proven that she was right. Precious squeezed her grandmother's hand and looked at her father. Chisholm was also crying, tears of joy and gratitude. He had been given a second chance. He had been given the opportunity to become the man he should have been all along. And together with his daughter, he was finally using his resources to do real good in the world. The story of Precious and Chisholm became known throughout Africa. It was a story of redemption and transformation, a story that showed that it is never too late to change, that love and purpose matter more than wealth, and that one person with courage and integrity can transform the world. And it all began with a poor girl who saw her mother's picture in a billionaire's room and had the courage to ask questions and demand answers.